Hello, this is Brian Hardeman from Thunderhead Engineering, and I would like to share with you some of the various research and development projects that have been underway during the last couple of years here at Thunderhead. I'll cover some developments in Pyrosim as well as some ongoing efforts into our visualization research. Most of our Pyrosim work has been focused on improving the productivity of fire simulation work. So things that help you get work done faster. The big thing there we've done this year is worked on modeling scenarios, and this was just released in our most recent release of Pyrosim. What this is a way to manage multiple configurations or scenarios and save the enabled or disabled state of different objects in your model in these different configuration sets. And by saving these separate scenarios, it lets you do things like run different fire sizes or different mesh resolutions or different combinations of mesh, and keep all of that within the same Pyrosim preprocessing model without having to save multiple copies of your model. And this way, if you change something like a piece of an obstruction that's in all of your models, you don't have to go through and update them all. You can just run them from within the same Pyrosim model. And along with this is also a feature that will allow you to flip back and forth between, you can select the active scenario and then run your FDS model based on the active scenario. And you can also export in a single action all of the FDS models, and it will write all the FDS input and even prepare a batch file that you could modify if you like to run them in serial. So here's an example. You can see here that we've written out, in this case, the default scenario in scenario 1 and scenario 2, and so it's going to run one and then the others. And you can modify this file, but it's a convenient way to manage and maintain multiple different simulation scenarios. And this was largely a result of feedback of many of our users of Pyrosim and FDS. Another one along the same lines of productivity, keyboard shortcuts. This is another. This is a long-time user request. We have a lot of Pyrosim experts out there that come from the CAD world, or they spend a lot of time building models. So they would really like to have keyboard shortcuts that save them time with the mouse. And so we've added support for mapping the most common user actions, and you can do this. You can set up with a macro or gaming keyboard. It's a good match. You can really sort of design your own productivity system. And if you have standards or you want to share these with other people in your organization, they can be shared through a settings file, which I'm kind of showing down here in the lower left. Our last big productivity feature, again released in the most recent version, is support for a cloud FDS simulation service. We've formed our first partnership with a cloud simulation provider. In this case, the service is called Cloud HPC, and it's from a company called CFD FEA Service, which is based in Italy, but they run all of their services based on the Google Cloud. So it's very capable and scalable services with data centers around the world. And we chose and partnered with them because they had a very clean and easy to work with programming interface. Their API was easy to connect with. And so basically you have the capability here, instead of running serial or parallel within Pyrosim, you can click Run Cloud and select your provider. For right now, we just have this one partnership. And then you can enter, there's sort of a token key that lets you communicate with your account on the back end. And if you don't have one of those yet, you can click here and create your account with their service. Give them your credit card, and obviously cloud CPU time's not free. But then you can select how many CPUs you need to run and how much memory your virtual machine needs. And then it submits the job for you. And at that point, you can close. Often these will be long-running jobs. And then there are also other UI elements that take you quickly to your web portal. And I'll just give you a bit of an overview of that. This is not within Pyrosim, but at the CFD FEA service website, once you've created an account and launched a job through Pyrosim, you can go there and check on all of your simulations and monitor your results and see how much you owe for your simulations. So currently you can manage your runs, you can browse and download files, and even the back end of the CFD FEA Cloud HPC service creates some snapshots of the CSV output files as it runs. In the future, We hope to connect with this even further and add some automated download of all your data. I mean, right now it's managed in the cloud through the service, but we'd like to be able to download it and automatically unpack all of your data to display with Pyrosim's results viewer and with SmokeView locally. Incorporate scripted plot generation through either SmokeView or Pyrosim results on the cloud side, and ideally in the long run provide GPU accelerated visualization so that you don't have to download all of your files locally to be able to visualize them. We're really excited about this. We think it could vastly simplify running in the cloud for a lot of novice users. So if you haven't seen that, please go check it out. And the last big section of research that we've been working on this year is in the area of visualization. We've got a few different projects here. One of the more fun ones that kind of grew out of a group of projects where about roughly every quarter we try to have a week or two where everybody on the team comes up with unique ideas just to try out, and we spend a week on these sort of research and development spikes. And one of these was to figure out if we could bring your own 3D model. And the concept there was that Pathfinder has always been time-consuming to include a new model because it takes us time to rig that model and do the custom coding to include it. And what we've managed to do here, which we thought was going to be a big problem, but the team found a really cool way to get it done, is to import. Now we can import FBX or OBJ, a variety of character format files. So you can go out and find either free or commercial models on the website and include these into your Pathfinder model without us having to custom rig them. Now there's some caveats with that in that it's best to use for a few custom elements of your model because these aren't being custom rigged and optimized with multiple levels of detail. They won't display with this high performance for a large number of occupants. So here's an example of a subway station that with some of these more creative avatars that are not included with Pyrosim. These are all third party, but shows that you can go out and then include your own and create very different scenarios. In this case, it's maybe looks more like a Starship port than a subway. Anyway, we're really excited about that. It's really adds a lot of flexibility and I think makes it easier for users without having to contact us to incorporate new models. And it also works for vehicle models. So, and by vehicle, we mean to include, you could incorporate a custom hospital bed or cart or luggage. There's a pretty endless set of possibilities where you could attach these objects into the model. Next up, we've added some work on occupant coloring. This is something that you could do before, but you could only color the cylinder representation of our objects, and now we're able to color those, overlay a color even on the 3D models, including those bring your own 3D models. And there's a variety of options now, including coloring the occupants not only by built-in values like density or velocity or level of service, but also by any contour that you've calculated and displayed underneath. So you could create a contour, like we've included some with the social distance work, that allows you to calculate how many people are within your social distance sphere or levels of connections. You can create that, display that as the color of the occupants. So, you know, you could have them turn red when two people are within your social distance and turn green when they're not. Or you can then also then assign the paths of the occupants to follow any of the same values. And if you combine that with our other filtering options with the contours for minimum, maximums, averages, you can get creative and display a lot of different types of data, either on the paths or the occupants. And then the last category of research and development from this year was in the area of trying to improve graphical realism in our visualization and results tools. The real goal here would be to try to provide a rendering quality that's closer to that you see in modern computer games. Option one would be to actually use a game. And I think if you keep up on some of the research, and we may see some here at this conference as well, you can use, there's a variety of game engines out there that you can incorporate your own mechanics into, your own simulation code to drive them. certainly that's the best way to leverage the high quality rendering that's already been done, right? So that you don't have to reinvent how to do all of that. The drawbacks there and that we've run into, and part of the reasons why Pathfinder is still incorporated the way it is that it's hard to do 20 or 30,000 occupants inside of game engines, although I've recently seen some interesting research along that lines too. The second option is to try to improve the rendering directly within Pathfinder, but so that's kind of a balancing act because we don't want to spend all of our development effort and research time on writing rendering code that's already been done elsewhere, right? And is not the critical, most important part of the work we do, which is trying to improve the evacuation simulation itself, at least with respect to Pathfinder. So under option one, we've had a really sharp intern work for us. Most of this work actually happened in the summer of 2019 and wrapped up for preview this year, is an export into the game engine. In this case, we provided an export of Pathfinder occupant data and location data and models into an Unreal game engine. So this ports into a customized Unreal game application, and it exports the model from Pathfinder. And in this case, I should have included a model from earlier, but the top model here on the right is a Pathfinder model that has this sort of glass tunnel over the top. And when you put it in a game engine, you now get all of these great realistic features like shadows, based on actual position of the lighting of the sun. So it can look vastly more realistic. And these also allow first-person interaction like other games. So I just have a couple of really small screenshots here that I can show, but you can see with these that, this is displaying on top here the actual Pathfinder output data. Pathfinder avatars have been imported along with the geometry, and the same on the bottom here. And you can tell a lot of it is about the shading and textures and the visual quality. And so this is really valuable, for instance, if your client is, the most important view to your client is the realistic depiction of how the space is being utilized by the occupants. However, if you need quantitative data, then you're probably going to be needing more of the features like the occupant coloring, occupant paths, and contour maps, heat maps that are available within the Pathfinder results. So on that note, in the Pathfinder results viewer itself, there's some preview features in there that are not enabled by default, but if you contact us, we can help you test them out, and you can help us test them out. One of them is called Ambient Occlusion, and if you haven't heard of that, it's a term for shadows that are diffuse and that result from an object. So this is like, how down in the corner of an object it's darker, or inside of a tube it's darker because it's sort of diffusely blocking the ambient light that's coming from all over. So this is not a direct shadow technique, but it's more diffuse, but it adds a lot of visual realism. It's similar to how an object might look on an overcast day. To give you an idea of the effect of this, really, here's a model rendered with standard Pathfinder results, and then I'll flip back and forth with turning on ambient occlusion. You can see it adds a fair amount of depth and realism to the model. Now, I'll also show this in video form, in which case it's a little bit harder to tell, but I think you still can see that on the right, it looks a bit more realistic with the added shading throughout the model. Another one along the same lines is motion blur. This one is really more of a term or concept from photography or film, where the shutter speed is not fast enough to capture the movement, but it's also much the way our eyes behave, the way the brain and eye processing system, fast moving objects are blurred to our perception as well. But in a computer, you'd have to simulate this to get the same effect. And it's interesting because, a film movie shot at 24 frames per second, it looks perfectly normal to people. But if you try to look at a computer-generated scene at 20 or 30 frames per second, it looks very choppy because it doesn't have this natural blur to it. So typically a video game or computer rendering may require 60 frames per second or more to appear realistic. So adding in artificial blur can help improve this, although it can be very intensive, computer intensive for the rendering process. So typically it would be reserved for offline rendering, but we've done some work with techniques that allow us to use shaders and modern graphics hardware to display motion blur in real time. Where this can also help more so in applications like Pathfinder movement simulation is when you've sped up the results to show essentially kind of like a time lapse. So here's without any motion blur. So this is standard Pathfinder results, and people are moving along pretty quickly here. But if I freeze it, you'll notice that everybody's, nice and sharp. Here's the version with motion blur, and you'll notice it gives it more of that time lapse effect. And if I freeze this one, you'll notice that an individual frame is not sharp because it's blurring them as they go through. I'd like to wrap up by thanking the entire team at Thunderhead Engineering for all of the work that has gone into this research and development effort. We have a really talented team that's put in a lot of hard work over the years to make all these improvements possible. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
So we're live now. We're just waiting for Brian to run over here from the control booth. So we'll give him a second to come over as people make their way over from the stage. Hey, Brian.
I made it.
That's great. Yeah, we see the numbers jumping now. So we'll just look forward to any kind of questions or anything. Here's one from Enrico. Will the game engine export be only to visualize pre-calculated crowd movement, or could it potentially interact with colliders, triggers in the game engine? In other words, in the long term, would there be a two-way communication between the game engine and Pathfinder?
We don't really have, in the short term, no. I mean, you can interact with it sort of in the game sense in that you can roam around and have to avoid the occupants that are in there, but they're just following the preset paths. We don't have any plans at the moment to essentially implement a new simulation engine that combines with the game engine, but that's certainly an area of research that could happen.
Okay, great.
And I apologize for ending up with a second talk here. The first one ended up like really long after everybody gave me all the great stuff we've done in the last couple of years, and I had to cut it down, and then it was some people pulled out. So at least we said, hey, good, we can slip in some more stuff.
That's right. So thank you for the people who had to withdraw, unfortunately. We had a little bit more time.
Well, we're always sad to see people go. It's been a cool conference so far. So,
yeah. Any other questions or anything from anybody? Antonio, I think you said something like, but that works right now. What were you referring to? Was it the importing the CAD part, the vehicles?
A lot of this stuff has already been released. I was kind of covering everything that's happened in the last couple of years. The big stuff that's sort of in development is the importing 3D characters was released a couple of point releases ago. The big stuff that's sort of still in research is the cues that I spoke of in the first part of the talk, and then some of the like the ambient occlusion and motion blur, because some of that works, but not necessarily in all cases. Like it may not work always in videos with certain types of FDS results turned on and stuff. So characters from Fuse, I don't know where they got pulled from.
Yeah,
I think
so
those were all free characters. So
yeah, some of those it's nice now because you can pull some from Fuse and build your characters there. You can use like Make Human to generate character models and import, and there's some recommendations on poses that work better and not. And
we don't support absolutely every format because there's a lot of tiny little nuances, but we recommend 2 or 3 places you can pick up characters that should work.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great opportunity there, and that's been a thing in the past. People are saying, "Hey, can you represent this demographic?"
Richard
now it's like
chimed in. Richard's our graphics developer. He said those particular models were from Mixamo. So
okay, thanks, Richard, for that. Yeah, so now you're able to kind of put in whoever you need for your specific application by building those characters yourself. So yeah, they are mixed or linked. Yeah.
All right. I don't want to drag out time too much since I'm running the controls. So.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks.
I'm going to run back over there. You can cover a little time while I huff and puff back to the other side of the office.
I'll be listening for you in the back channel here. So.
All right. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, and if there's anything else here. Oh, yeah. Eric's just clarifying here. We pulled them from there. We recommend models from AXYZ Design. Make Human works well. The Diffuse Mixamo. There's a lot. Yeah. People models. All right. Well, thanks again to Brian. Go ahead and drop that out, and we're heading over to the stage. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you there.